Hello everybody, my name is Naidovich and today we are going to talk about CSS grid layout. According to my plan, after I introduce myself to you a little bit, we are going to speak on advantages and disadvantages of this technology, and we will learn how to use it a little bit. And as the questions and answers section, you are to write some comments and ask your questions below this video. So, who I am? I am growing right now as a front-end developer, and for now I got neither commercial nor working experience in front-end development. I got my knowledge in HTML and CSS from Teach Me Skills schools, and for now I am a Rolling Scope student. In fact, I got acquainted with the CSS grid layout something about a couple of weeks ago, and I can assure you that only a week will be enough for you and for anyone to master this technology. Of course, you will meet unaccustomed things, and whether you meet them or not, the CSS grid is not too hard to learn and to use. Make sure you can learn it from these sources. There are Rolling Scope presentation, official specification, the article at CSS Tricks, the Mozilla Developer Network documentation, and the amazing site where we can learn the using of the CSS grid by examples. But I want to say a special thanks to the presentation by Morten Rand Hendrickson. It is named CSS Grid Changes Everything About Web Layouts. I strongly recommend you to watch this presentation right after mine one. So, I am going to say a couple of times that CSS Grid is the power. And now let's answer the question, why is it power? Profits and advantages. The first advantage of the CSS grid layout is that your HTML, your markup, becomes much cleaner. I want to show you an example. If you are a Rolling Scope student or Rolling Scope's mentor, I think you remember this. Making this task, I used the CSS flexbox. And now let's count the tree complexity with CSS flexbox. There goes header, there goes body, the grandparent. After body, there goes header and wrapper. There goes the complexity. Our content is only at the 5th step, and pay attention to this div. It is going to contain some another divs which contains some another content. And imagine that this page is more complex. And let's look at this page from the point of view of CSS grid. And let's count the tree complexity again. Body, semantic elements without nesting, navigation bar and sections, and all the section content is going right here. The image, heading, paragraph, two meaningless divs, and all our social links. In fact, I would recommend to contain these social links inside a div, but as a matter of fact, we can go right there, right this way. And for this page, that is all. And you can agree with me that was a really actually small page. Can you imagine that what is going on when you work on the huge projects, something like this? This is a WordPress theme, and I have counted the complexity of the DOM tree. This is 26 levels. And ask yourself a question: do you really need this? I think it is definitely should burn in hell. And I think you think so. The next advantage: you will be more flexible, much more flexible in responsive web design. For example, you have a page, a simple page, and you are to make the mobile version. You are to convert this page into this. And you are looking at this and you are, what the hell is going on? Where is the social icons moved? Where did the footer move? It's a hell, really a hell. And you are going to iterate some variants of how do you do this, and it is about DOM shaking, JavaScript using, Bootstrap using, but actually not. There is a simple way to solve this problem. Just one single media query. Don't you believe me? I will show you how to do this a little bit later. The next advantage is that you are going to feel an absolutely freedom in multi-column web pages. Look at these examples. They are awesome, they are beautiful web pages, and I am not actually the user of Twitter's Bootstrap, but as far as I remember, the Bootstrap has a 12-column limitation. So, can you see any 12-column limitation, for example, here? I cannot. And I can even imagine what does the typical Bootstrap user feel right now. Something like that. The next advantage and the main advantage is that you will get a completely new to you stack of knowledge, and as a result you will gain a totally different approach to the style sheets and layout creating. Let's make some retrospective from the beginning of the web. We had floats, we had positions, we had flexbox. Floats and positions are commonly not purposed for creating the web layouts, and flexbox seem to be the rescue. But flexbox is a very I love flexbox actually. I have been using it for more than a year, but flexbox allows you to work only in one direction, either row or column. And when you need to work in both directions, you need to nest the container inside the container. That's no good. The CSS grid in common cases does not require the container nesting. That results that you are constructing the meaningful flow, and it gives you a bunch of whole new way of thinking about style sheets. In fact, CSS become more loyal for your HTML. And the main question is, are you all ready to change your mind? If ready, fasten your seatbelts and let's roll. Here we will look at some common examples how to use CSS grid. It takes commonly just 2 steps: to set a grid container and draw a grid inside, and to set your grid items and place your items inside the grid container. It works just like this and comes with the following code. So, such a basic code. And what about a little more mess? For example, like this. Totally not mess at all. And I am going to explain you why. To get CSS grid into your work, you gotta learn some new stuff. This is some new terminology, some new CSS properties, as a matter of fact there are 28, and a new measure unit, FR or fraction. Easy, isn't it? So, the grid container. It's about the terminology. It is the parent of your grid items. It's the element on which the display grid is applied to. The grid item is the direct child of the grid container. Grid items are direct children of the grid container. Grid line is the dividing lines that make up the structure of the grid. Grid track is the space between two adjacent grid lines. Grid cell is the space between two adjacent row and two adjacent column grid lines. It's the single unit of the grid. Grid area is the total spaces surrounded by four grid lines. It may be 1 or 2 or 4, how many can you even imagine grid cells? There goes CSS properties, and we will come across a few of them because we are going to fall back into our two steps: to set a grid container and to place a grid item inside of a grid container. So, to set a grid container, you first of all should get a sheet of paper to draw your container and to draw lines, to draw a grid inside your container. And in this example, we can see the container which have 4 columns, first, second, third, and fourth, 4 rows. We can see that the second column is twice larger than the rest, and we can see that some rows are at the top of the page of the container, some rows, a single row at the bottom of the container, and the rest row takes the rest space. So, first thing you should do is to set to container display grid. Then you work with properties such as grid template columns and grid template rows. They take as a value measures: pixel measures, automatic measures, which is the equal divisions if they are more than one, percentage, but I do not recommend you to use percentage in grid layout, and that's why. When you want to divide your grid items with the gap will not be included into the percentage, and as a result you will get the sum of gaps as an extra width of your page, and you will fall into the horizontal scroll. It's not good. So to replace the percentage, there comes fraction, or FR. FR is the equal space the page is divided into. For example, if you repeat one fraction 5 times, your page, your container will be divided into 5 equal spaces. What that is, the fraction is. And if you set the code something like that: one fraction, two fraction, one fraction, one fraction, two template columns. It result in something like this. Your columns will take such a space. If you, for example, do the 5-column layout with the repeating one fraction, you can use the CSS function repeat. It will help you a lot. So when you configured your grid container, you can observe that your container lines, your grid lines are named. Their names are, they have even two variants of names. They are positive and negative number. For example, vertical lines are named 1, 2, 3, and 5, and -5, -4, -3, -1, -2, and -1. This would be the same lines. And once you set the display grid into your container, your elements will be automatically placed like this. And we don't want them to be placed like this, so let's place them in an order. So there is the properties like grid column start, grid column end, grid row start, and grid row end. For example, for our mine, we said something like this: grid column start 2, grid column end 3. It means that our main should start from line 2 and end until line 3. The same with the rows, and it result in this. Grid column start, grid column end, grid row start, and grid row end have a shorthand: grid column and grid row. At the grid column, we set which line we want to start with, and which line we want to end with, and separate it with dash. And it works just like this. The same with the moments when you want to span it in more than one cell, and here comes to rescue you a value named span. For example, our footer, we command it to start from line 1 and span 4 columns, 4 cells. And it works like this. And another approach to the placement is my favorite approach, is that you are straight in the grid container set where your elements are going to be. And in the when you work with the grid items, you just give your items a names, and it result in this. And do you remember I promised you to show how this works with just a single media query and without JavaScript and Bootstrap? So the desktop markup is like this, with grid template areas, and the single media query for mobile markup, mobile layout, is just you change your grid template areas, and that is all. Magic? I don't think so. You can even nest your grid containers. You can you have a grid item inside a grid container, and you can make this grid item a grid container, like this, for example. The most power comes to you when you combine a grid with flexbox. For example, our favorite task 2. So, for instance, the article is set to display grid and uses grid template areas, and our social buttons area is flex. And it will help you us a lot when you do the mobile layout. The same grid, but a little reworked grid template areas at the article, and the little reworked social buttons at the using flex. You can learn more information from these very sources I told before. And is it also good? Is it the really perfect layout that we are going to use right from now? So I am going to iterate some inconveniences and disadvantages. In fact, I've counted only one inconvenience and one disadvantage of CSS grid layout. The disadvantage was the property of grid column gap. For example, when you set the grid gap to 10 pixels, the other grid gaps during the row will be 10 pixels, and you cannot set them to 15, 12, 20 pixels, and the same goes to the rows. And the inconvenience, it will comes with the experience, it will maybe comes with practice of using CSS grid, but I once came to the thing that using margins and paddings can be very tricky and can realize an unexpected behavior. For example, this margin bottom works inside of the header. It shouldn't be like that. Plus, you should keep in mind that such CSS properties like float, display inline block, display table cell, vertical align does not apply to a grid item. And that's all maybe, but yes, that is a question that makes us all trembling up for now. What about older browsers? So, the picture is quite positive right now. As far as I remember, Google Chrome supports CSS grid layout from the version 54. And let me quote Morten Rand Hendrickson: "There are two elephants in this room: the Internet Explorer and the Edge." And I even made a quotation in the style of his presentation. And what should I say? Microsoft Edge is now supports CSS grid layout at the full power from the version 15. And Internet Explorer at the version 10 supports CSS grid layout, but uses the very first specification of it that is now out of date. And I maybe surprise you this time, but I am going to ask you two questions. The first question, 15 seconds to think it over. Who do you think has invented the CSS grid layout? Any ideas? Ready for some surprise? So let's go to the next question. What browser do you think the CSS grid layout was invented for? The same 15 seconds to think it over. The same, be ready for surprise. Ideas? It's Internet Explorer at the version 10. That's why the very this browser supports the very first specification of CSS grid layout. But what should I say overall? As long as Internet Explorer exists on this world, and as long as it haven't been self-destructed, we cannot rely on the CSS grid layout as the only reliable source of their layouts. And we really have to fall back to these methodics, these hacks, such as Internet Explorer conditionals or media or supports query in the CSS, and we are to make the separate layout CSS file for the older browsers. But still, the future is going on, and you all should not stay back. You should follow the future. Because who will do it if not you, if not us? Use CSS grid. The question to use CSS grid in your production or not to use CSS grid is completely up to you, but I advise you to start using it and to use it in the full power. That was Alex Naidovich. Thank you very much.